Myra's heart raced with a mix of fear and intrigue as she sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, the weight of recent events playing heavily on her mind. The silence of the warm night was shattered by the shrill ringing of her phone. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone, her breath catching in her throat as she heard the familiar voice on the other end. "Hello, Myra, it's me again." Myra's pulse quickened as she recognized the voice of the mysterious caller who had been haunting her for the past few weeks. Each time he called it was to deliver a chilling message, each one more terrifying than the last. "What do you want from me?" Myra demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know what I want," the voice replied cryptically. "I want you to understand that my heart belongs to you." Myra's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the caller's words. Who was he? And why was he fixated on her? Before she could gather her thoughts, there was a knock at the door. Myra's heart skipped a beat as she approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to see a shadowy figure standing on the other side. With trembling hands, she unlocked the door and swung it open, only to be met with the sight of a lifeless body slumped against the threshold. She gasped in horror as she recognized the face of the man she had been on a date with just days earlier. "Callum," she whispered. But it wasn't just any corpse. The man's chest had been torn open, his heart removed and replaced with a chilling note that read, "My heart belongs to Myra." She had joined a dating site and had quite a few matches. She particularly liked one guy named Callum. They set up a date and met the Friday night over drinks. After a very pleasant evening, she went home. Saturday night, she met up with another date, and each Friday and Saturday after that. Terror gripped Myra's heart as she realized the true extent of the danger she was in. She slammed the door and secured each bolt. Falling to her knees, she sobbed uncontrollably. Someone was targeting her, someone who would stop at nothing to possess her heart. With each passing day, the threats grew more. Each date she went on ended in tragedy. Each victim posed as if proposing to her, their chest hollowed out, heart removed and replaced with a note that read, "My heart belongs to Myra." She got up slowly and reached for her phone. 911? "What is the nature of your emergency?" the operator answered. "Yes, hello. I'd like to report a murder." Myra answered all the questions the operator asked her, and they told her the police were on the way. Over the next few days and weeks, the police were in and out of her apartment, each time investigating the death of another young man. A massive manhunt for this serial killer was underway. In the meantime, Myra was advised not to leave her apartment and not to go on any other dates until the killer is caught. Desperate for answers, Myra searched her memory for clues. She called friends and family. When her best friend Esther answered the phone, she could hear the tension in Myra's voice. "You sound terrible, girl. You sound like you haven't slept in weeks." Myra couldn't hold back the tears anymore. "Esther, do you remember anyone from my past who would try to hurt me, or who obsessed over me, or anything you can think of?" Myra explained to Esther what has been happening over the past few weeks. "Oh my word, you poor thing, I can't think of anyone. I'm coming over right now. You cannot be on your own." "Thanks for the offer, but I don't think I want company right now," she said. After a few minutes of chatting and catching up, the friends hung up. She tried to put it out of her mind, but those images, they played in her mind like a true horror movie. In a race against time, she searched her memory, trying to uncover the demons of her past and unmask the killer before she becomes the next victim in his deadly game of hearts. Hours turned into days as Myra waited for answers from the police. Since she hadn't been out of her apartment and was running out of milk and necessities, Myra decided to shower and head to the store to pick up some supplies. She walked up and down the aisles. As she turned towards her trolley, she bumped into a shopper. "I'm so sorry," she said, smiling up at him. His eyes pierced hers, then his face broke into a smile. "Don't worry about it," the man said. "Enjoy your shopping." She continued walking and then headed toward checkout. At her apartment, she unlocked the door, put down her packages, and headed for the kitchen. She turned on the kettle and brewed a strong cup of coffee. Myra took her cup and headed for her balcony. Feet up on the railing, she sipped her steaming hot coffee, her eyes combing the streets and buildings. Suddenly, she lowered her body into the chair, only the top of her head was visible. She peeked down at the sidewalk. The man she had bumped into at the store was leaning against a street lamp looking up at her. Dread and fear crept through her veins as she ran into her apartment, locking the door behind her. She ran to her bedroom, and from behind the net curtaining she looked down to the sidewalk. His hand beat on his chest, mimicking a heartbeat, then turned around and left. Myra called the police station, who then sent an officer to her apartment. She gave a clear description of the man and the exact time he was there. After they left, she locked her door and lay on her bed in a fetal position, crying herself to sleep. She woke up her room in darkness. Everything was quiet, but something had woken her. Sitting at the edge of her bed, she listened. There it is again, she thought to herself. A clear scratching noise came from her French door. Tiptoeing to the living room, she peeked at the balcony. She saw the silhouette of a man picking at the door. As fast and as silent as she was able to, Myra ran to her room and locked the door. She called 911, but before she could say anything, the intruder banged at the door. She put her phone next to her bed. She could hear the operator on the other end. "Go away!" she screamed. "Why are you following me? What do you want?" "You know what I want," the voice replied. "I want you to understand that my heart belongs to you." He repeated the same message as always. The door burst open and he stood in the doorway looking at her. The blood drained from her face as she now recognized the man. Robert Trudeau, a man she had dated for about 6 months when she was fresh in college. She had dropped him like hotcake because of his possessive nature, but he had never let go. That was 10 years ago. "I have looked for you for so many years. You left me with a shattered heart and thought you could get away with it. It's time you pay. You will be mine." He lunged forward and Myra screamed. She tripped over her shoe and fell on the bed. Robert had a shiny scalpel in his hand. He jumped on top of her, ripping her top to pieces. He pushed the scalpel into her flesh at the point of her heart. She screamed in pain, and at the same time there was an explosion. Robert lay on top of her, blood dripping on her body. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the officer asked her. Her apartment was swarming with police. A gurney was brought in, and his body placed in a bag and removed. One officer placed a blanket around her shoulders and led her to their car. After her release from the hospital, Myra couldn't face living in that apartment. She had packed her belongings and moved to a different town. She now has an unlisted number,